Did Jesus truly rise from the dead? If not, then all of Christianity is false. But if he did, then it's worth turning to the Gospels to read what Jesus of Nazareth had to say to us. If he didn't rise from the dead, what motivated the apostles to proclaim a lie? How did they manage to establish such a massive church? These are very important questions. No one seriously interested in the question of God's existence can ignore them, because if Jesus truly did rise from the dead, then we really need to examine what he had to say. The Jews lost their independence in 63 BC, when Judea was taken over by the Roman Empire. This was a turning point. A nation that had recently enjoyed autonomy came under the rule of a foreign, pagan power. Rome didn't always govern directly. At first, it ruled through local leaders. The most important of these was Herod the Great, who ruled from 37 to 4 BC. Though he held the title of king, his authority was entirely dependent on Rome. After Herod's death, his kingdom was divided, weakening the country even more. In Galilee, his son Herod Antipas ruled as a tetrarch, a lower-ranking ruler subject to Rome and without real independence. It was in this territory that Jesus grew up and taught. Judea itself, with Jerusalem, came under the direct rule of Roman governors from 6 AD onward, such as Pontius Pilate. They held supreme judicial and military authority. The loss of independence remained a deep and painful wound for the Jews. Roman taxes, foreign soldiers stationed in the land, brutal suppression of revolts, and a pagan government interfering in the affairs of the chosen people all stirred opposition, frustration, and anger. This created a climate of growing tension and a sense that the current order was unbearable. No wonder messianic hopes intensified. Many understood the Messiah primarily as a political leader and liberator, someone who would break Rome's power and restore Israel's freedom. It was in these circumstances that Jesus of Nazareth began his ministry. The apostles who followed him had certain expectations. They believed he was the Messiah, but they thought in earthly terms. They hoped he would free Israel from Roman occupation and become king. That's why on Palm Sunday, Jesus was welcomed into Jerusalem as a king. The people of the city genuinely believed he would seize power, drive out the Romans, and restore the kingdom of Israel. Their reasoning was earthly, but God's plan was far more ambitious. His goal was not the political advancement of a few inhabitants of a tiny state, but a profound spiritual renewal of all humanity across the globe. The apostles, too, understood Jesus' mission in earthly terms. Only Peter was able to profess faith in Jesus as the Messiah, and John seemed to intuitively grasp a deeper meaning in his teaching. Yet even they weren't ready to accept the vision of a suffering Messiah. You can find more about this in the video that describes the evolution of the apostles' faith. Link in the description. The crucifixion was a shock to them, shattering all their hopes. Instead of triumph came defeat. Instead of liberation, a shameful death on a cross. In their eyes, the Messiah had lost, and with him, the dream of Israel's redemption was buried. What happened that led these same men, not long after, to come out of hiding, begin proclaiming the good news, and lay the foundation of the world's largest religion? Moreover, they did this at the cost of their own lives. Let's reflect on this for a moment. Remember, many people don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Let's adopt their perspective and analyze the apostles' behavior. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then what motivated them to go out and teach about him? Some suggest they were driven by a desire for wealth or other benefits, but we know that none of them became rich. On the contrary, all except John died tragic deaths. Some were beheaded, others were stoned, St. Peter was crucified. That, 1,000 years later or even earlier, some bishop or prince used religion for personal gain is a different issue, one found in all religions and areas of life. Unfortunately, people can exploit anything for profit. Even science can be misused immorally for personal gain, but that doesn't discredit science. just as the wrongdoings of some Christians do not discredit the teachings of Jesus. So what motivated the apostles, assuming Jesus did not rise from the dead? Let's remember, they publicly proclaimed that Jesus had indeed risen. Why would they do that if it wasn't true? And in the face of death, during interrogations for example, would none of them admit it was all made up? Would they really die for a lie? Some might say they went mad. All of them, at the same time? Even though they had previously acted completely rationally? And these so-called madmen managed to convince a huge number of people and start the world's largest religion. The only rational explanation for their behavior is that Jesus really did rise from the dead, and they saw him. Some say they're not credible because they were part of a sect, and so on. So, a testimony from someone outside their group would be helpful. It just so happens we have such a witness, St. Paul. He didn't believe in Jesus, he persecuted his followers. He aided in the stoning of St. Stephen. He was educated, wealthy, and had an established social position. He held Roman citizenship, a rare and prestigious status among Jews. He had no reason to believe in Jesus, until he saw him. Think for a moment. What would you do if you knew your friend had died, and then a few days later he appeared to you? Not as a ghost, but in the flesh, so you could touch him, talk to him, sit at the table and eat together. You would witness with your own eyes that life doesn't end with death. I think after such an experience, you would do exactly what the apostles did. There's another detail in the gospel accounts of the resurrection worth closer attention. The risen Jesus first appeared to women. In the Gospel of John, it says he appeared to Mary Magdalene. The Synoptic Gospels also report that women were the first witnesses of the empty tomb and the appearance. The fact that women were made the first witnesses of the resurrection was extremely awkward. Today, we might not fully grasp this, but at that time, it was a disadvantage. Let's remember that the prevailing misogyny meant women were not treated as credible sources of information. Women couldn't testify in court as full witnesses, and their words were often considered emotional and unreliable. If the gospel accounts were fictional, women would never have been made the witnesses of this event. If the authors of the Gospels wanted to deceive readers, they would not have written that women were the first to see the risen one. If you make something up, you do it better, unless, of course, those were the actual facts. The foundation of Christianity is the empty tomb of Jesus. That's why St. Paul wrote plainly, "And if Christ has not been raised, then empty too is our preaching, empty too your faith." That statement is ruthless in its logic. Paul leaves no room for half measures. For 2,000 years, alternative versions of the events have been proposed, that the disciples stole the body, that they went to the wrong tomb, that it was all a hallucination or a legend. The problem is, none of these theories hold up when compared to the facts and the witnesses' behavior. Let's assume the disciples did steal the body, but why die for a lie if they gained nothing from it? If Jesus' body had existed, it would have been indisputable proof that there was no resurrection. The apostles would have had no motivation to die for the cause, especially when they initially hid to save their lives. We know that at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, they were in hiding, afraid they would suffer the same fate. Only St. John was at the cross, and suddenly, these same men went out into the streets and boldly proclaimed that Jesus had risen. They died as martyrs, even though they supposedly knew it wasn't true, because they had hidden the body. This hypothesis makes no sense. That's why the empty tomb remains, to this day, a reality that cannot be ignored. Everyone who doesn't believe in Jesus' resurrection must answer the question, why did the apostles give their lives for a lie? Thank you for your attention. Please consider subscribing to this channel, giving a thumbs up, and supporting me in creating it.